When we first pulled up to the house on Elm Street, it felt off. My wife, Claire, loved it instantly. The large porch, the old brickwork, the towering oak tree in the front yard. She had that spark in her eyes, the one that told me we were buying it, no matter how I felt. Our daughter, Emily, ran up the steps, her laughter echoing across the quiet street. It seemed like a dream come true. But the moment I crossed the threshold, a cold shiver crawled up my spine, settling deep in my gut. The air inside was still, almost suffocating. The smell of something decaying lingered faintly, but I chalked it up to an old, unused house. The realtor assured us it had been vacant for years, just waiting for a family like ours to breathe life back into it. At first, the days passed peacefully. We unpacked. Emily settled into her new room, and I began to feel a strange attachment to the house. It was quiet, too quiet sometimes, but it was home, or at least we tried to make it feel like home. Then the footsteps started. At first, they were subtle, like the creak of an old floorboard, easy to dismiss. But as the nights wore on, the sounds became more distinct, heavy, as if someone was pacing up and down the hallway outside our bedroom. "Did you hear that?" I'd whisper to Claire, but she always shook her head. "You're imagining things?" she'd say. But I knew what I heard. One night, it happened again. I woke up to that same rhythmic pacing, louder this time. I held my breath, straining to hear. The footsteps stopped, right outside Emily's door. My heart pounded in my chest as I quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Claire. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under the bed and crept into the hallway. The moment I touched the doorknob to Emily's room, it felt like ice. I hesitated, but I had to check. When I opened the door, the room was empty. At least, that's what I thought. But then Emily stirred in her bed, her face twisted in a look of terror. "Daddy, he's watching me again." "Who, baby? Who's watching you?" My voice cracked, though I tried to sound calm. "The man with red eyes," she whispered, her voice trembling. A chill ran through me, but I forced a smile. "It's just a bad dream. There's no one here." But the weight of the lie settled deep in my chest. I could feel it. Someone, or something, was watching us. From that night on, everything changed. The house became more sinister. Objects would move on their own. Chairs dragged across the floor. Lights flickered uncontrollably, and the air grew colder with each passing day. Claire was still skeptical, but even she couldn't explain the eerie whispers that seemed to seep from the walls at night. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what we were dealing with. After hours of digging through old records at the town library, I found it. An article buried deep in the archives. Edgar Crane, the house's former owner, had gone mad. The details were horrific. He had murdered his entire family, and then in a fit of rage he took his own life. Locals claimed his spirit was trapped in the house, forever seeking revenge for the blood he'd spilled. I knew we had to leave. But it wasn't that simple. The house didn't want us to go. One night, Emily woke up screaming again, but this time it wasn't just fear. She was shaking, her skin cold as ice. "He touched me, Daddy. He touched me." My blood ran cold as I saw red welts on her cheek, like someone had clawed at her. That was the final straw. We contacted Dr. Emily Carter, a renowned paranormal investigator. I didn't care how ridiculous it sounded. I just wanted to protect my family. When she arrived, Dr. Carter set up cameras and EVP equipment throughout the house. As the night wore on, she captured things that defied explanation. Shadowy figures darting across the rooms, whispers of voices long dead. But the worst was yet to come. On her third night, Dr. Carter decided to perform a séance. I wasn't sure about it, but we were desperate. She gathered us in the living room, candles lit around us, the air thick with tension. As she called out to the spirits, the temperature plummeted. The room grew so cold I could see my breath. Then, out of nowhere, a blinding flash of light consumed the room. It was like the house exploded with energy, shaking the very foundation. I blinked, trying to regain my sight, but when the light faded, Claire and Emily were gone. I searched the entire house, screaming their names, but there was nothing. No sign of them. Just silence. Dr. Carter stood frozen, her face pale as she muttered something about a conduit and unleashing it. I didn't care. My family was gone, vanished without a trace. Now I sit here in this cursed house, waiting for them to return. I can still hear the footsteps, the whispers, the cold breath on the back of my neck. I know they're still here, somewhere. But it's not them, not really. And every night, the man with red eyes watches me, just like he watched Emily. It was Halloween night, when we decided to throw the party. An old mansion, sitting on the outskirts of town, was our chosen spot. A place long abandoned, left to rot and whisper its dark secrets to anyone who dared listen. Locals warned us about it, saying it was cursed, but we laughed it off. Cursed? That just made it better. The mansion had an air of decay. Cracked windows, crumbling stonework, the walls barely holding together. We arrived just before sunset, its eerie light casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. The place seemed to swallow the last remnants of daylight as we crossed the threshold, its hollow silence broken only by the sound of our footsteps. Inside, the air was stale, the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes and lingers on your skin. Dust covered everything. We had to wipe down the surfaces just to set up the decorations. But that was part of the charm. We hung fake cobwebs over real ones, set up spooky lanterns, and filled bowls with candy. It wasn't long before the place started to come alive, with the buzz of people arriving, music thumping through the walls, laughter bouncing off the decrepit ceilings. Everything felt normal at first. People were dancing, drinking, lost in the thrill of the night. But as more guests filled the mansion, I started noticing something strange. There was a figure among us, cloaked in black from head to toe. His mask was grotesque, a twisted blend of flesh and bone, more real than any costume I'd ever seen. I assumed it was someone from town trying to pull a scare. It's Halloween, after all. But no one seemed to know who he was. When I asked around, I got the same answer. No idea. He just showed up. At first, I ignored it. I was too busy keeping the party going, making sure everyone was having fun. But as the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Objects started moving on their own. A glass shattered right in front of me, exploding into shards without anyone touching it. I saw a bowl of candy slide across the table by itself. I chalked it up to the effects of the alcohol and the atmosphere, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. Then came the whispers, soft, unintelligible at first. It was like the house was breathing, speaking to itself in the corners of the room where the shadows seemed to thicken. I asked a few of my friends if they heard it, but they shrugged it off. The more I listened, though, the louder they became. Words formed: leave, go, don't stay. Every time I looked for the cloaked figure, he was there, lingering just out of reach, watching. His eyes, red, glowing faintly beneath the mask, would lock on to mine, and I felt something cold creep into my bones. I tried to keep my distance, but no matter where I moved, he was always nearby, always watching. Things escalated quickly after midnight. The whispers became screams, rattling through the mansion like the walls themselves were crying out. I saw people stumbling, looking confused, as if they were suddenly lost in a house that wasn't that large. Lights flickered, casting grotesque shadows that twisted and stretched in impossible directions. And then, the record. The mysterious guest walked up to the DJ, handing him an old vinyl record. I was close enough to see the DJ's hands tremble as he took it, his eyes wide, as if something unseen held him in place. The guest didn't speak, just pointed at the turntable. The DJ hesitated, but eventually placed it on, the needle scratching into place. That's when everything went wrong. The music that poured out wasn't music at all. It was a low, droning hum that rattled the floors and made the air in the room vibrate. The lights flickered once, then went out completely, plunging the room into total darkness. Panic set in. People started shouting, scrambling for the doors, but the mansion had other plans. I tried to push my way through the crowd, toward the exit, but the walls seemed to shift, the layout of the house changing before my eyes. Corridors stretched longer, twisting and curving in ways they hadn't before. The doors we'd walked through were gone, replaced by solid walls. The windows, too, were sealed, the boards thick and impenetrable. And then, from somewhere deep within the mansion, I heard a voice. Not a whisper this time, but a booming, hollow voice that echoed through every room. "You are not welcome here." The crowd fell silent. I turned, and there he was, standing in the center of the room, the cloaked figure. His mask, once grotesque, now seemed alive, shifting and pulsing like flesh. His eyes, those glowing red eyes, burned into mine. He lifted a hand, and the walls around us groaned, the floor beneath us trembling. One by one, the guests began to disappear. They didn't scream or run. They simply vanished, like they were being swallowed by the shadows themselves. I saw my friends blink out of existence, their faces frozen in terror. I tried to run, but the floor opened beneath me, and I fell. Into darkness. Into nothing. When I woke up, I was alone. The mansion was silent, the party gone, the guests erased. I stumbled through the fenster of the house, disoriented, searching for an exit. Eventually I found the front door, hanging open as if it had never been locked. I never saw the cloaked figure again. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I hear that same low hum, feel the cold gaze of glowing red eyes. I don't go out on Halloween anymore, and I never go near the mansion, because I know it's still waiting. The old highway stretched out before me, a narrow strip of asphalt swallowed by the night. I could barely make out the road ahead as my headlights cut through the dense fog that rolled in with the storm. The rain was relentless, hammering down on my windshield like an unholy symphony. I glanced at the dashboard clock. It was almost midnight. I just wanted to get home. The late shift at work had dragged on longer than expected, and my body ached for the warmth of my bed. The road was eerily empty, as if the rest of the world had the good sense to stay inside on a night like this. But not me. No, I had to be out here, miles away from civilization, on a forgotten stretch of highway that seemed to lead nowhere. The trees lining the road swayed ominously, their bare branches creaking and groaning in the wind, like skeletal arms reaching out to grab passing cars. I shivered, not from the cold, but from the unsettling isolation of it all. And then I saw her. At first I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. The fog and rain made it hard to tell, but as my car drew closer, I realized there was a figure standing on the side of the road, a woman, drenched from head to toe, her white dress clinging to her like it had been soaked through for hours. She looked young, her dark hair matted against her face, and she was standing there, staring at me with wide, pleading eyes. She was hitchhiking. My gut told me to keep driving. This was the kind of situation you heard about in urban legends, the kind where helping a stranger never ended well. But something about the way she looked, so vulnerable, so desperate, made me pull over. I rolled down my window just a crack. You need a ride? I called out. Her lips trembled as she nodded, her eyes brimming with a gratitude that sent a shiver down my spine. I unlocked the door and she slid into the passenger seat without a word. A wave of cold air followed her, so frigid it was as if winter itself had climbed into my car. She closed the door softly, the sound barely audible over the wind and rain. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice like a breath of wind. "You're welcome," I said, trying to sound calm, even though my heart was racing. "Where are you headed?" "Just a little further down the road," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's a house. You can drop me off there." I glanced over at her, but she was staring straight ahead, her hands resting delicately in her lap. The dashboard lights cast an eerie glow on her pale face. And for a moment, I thought I saw something strange, a shimmer, like her dress was made of something not entirely real. "You sure you're okay?" I asked, my voice hesitant. She turned to me, her eyes wide and distant. "I'll be fine once I'm home." There was something off about her. I couldn't put my finger on it, but a knot of unease tightened in my gut. Still, I nodded and kept driving. The storm seemed to intensify with each passing minute, the rain lashing against the car, like it was trying to wash us off the road. "Take the next left," she said suddenly. I glanced at her. "Are you sure? I've driven this road for years, and I don't remember any turnoffs." She didn't answer, just nodded slowly, her eyes still fixed on the road ahead. Against my better judgment, I did as she asked. The tires skidded slightly as I turned onto a narrow dirt road that seemed to appear out of nowhere. It wound through the trees, the branches forming a dark tunnel overhead. The headlights barely pierced the darkness, and the deeper we drove, the heavier the air became, thick with an oppressive silence that was worse than the storm. Suddenly, I felt it. A presence. The temperature in the car dropped to a bone-chilling cold, and my breath fogged up the windshield. I looked over at the girl to ask her where exactly this house was, but she was gone. Vanished. I slammed on the brakes, my heart thudding in my chest. The passenger seat was empty, the door still locked, no sign that anyone had ever been there. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't imagined her. I couldn't have. The scent of her perfume still lingered in the air, faint, floral, haunting. I scrambled out of the car, the rain drenching me instantly, and called out into the night. "Hello, are you there?" There was no answer, just the wind, howling through the trees like a chorus of mournful whispers. Panic set in as I walked around the car, looking for any trace of her, but the mud on the ground was undisturbed, no footprints, no sign of anyone but me. My pulse quickened, and a cold dread settled in my bones. I jumped back into the car, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. I needed to get out of there. As I reversed down the dirt road, something caught my eye. A white shawl lying in the mud by the side of the road. It was identical to the one the girl had been wearing. A chill ran down my spine, and my hands shook as I picked it up. The fabric was cold, wet from the rain, but it felt wrong, too heavy, too solid, like it was soaked in something other than water. I tossed it back into the car, gunned the engine, and sped down the highway, desperate to put distance between me and that cursed road. But as I neared the spot where I had picked her up, something glinted in the rearview mirror. There, standing by the side of the road in the exact same spot, was the girl. She was staring at me, her hand raised in a silent plea. I didn't stop. I didn't dare. But as I sped away, I could have sworn I heard her voice, faint and distant, whispering through the storm. Thank you.